What if the one person you hired to clean your home was the only one who could unlock your child's silent world? For billionaire tech mogul Alexander Sterling, life was a series of solvable problems and calculated returns. But his own daughter, 7-year-old Lily, diagnosed with non-verbal autism, was an equation he couldn't crack. He'd hired the best minds in the world, the most expensive therapists yet. She remained locked in silence, until a sound he'd never heard before drifted from her playroom, a soft melodic word in a language she had no reason to know, spoken to the new unassuming Maid. This is the story of a father who discovered the greatest treasure in his mansion wasn't his fortune, but the hidden genius his maid was secretly nurturing, a discovery that would either save his family or tear it apart forever. The Sterling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut wasn't a home. It was a monument to success carved from Italian marble and clad in panes of glass that stared blankly out at the manicured, emotionless grounds. For Alexander Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Innovations, it was also a fortress. It protected his legacy, his privacy, and most importantly, his daughter Lily. But it had also become her gilded cage. At 45, Alexander had the kind of sharp, imposing presence that made boardrooms tremble. His silver-streaked hair was impeccably styled. His bespoke suits were armor, and his eyes the color of a stormy sea, saw the world in data points and profit margins. He had conquered the tech world, but he was failing in the one venture that mattered: fatherhood. Since his wife Eleanor had been stolen from them by a swift and merciless cancer 2 years ago, the silence in the mansion had grown teeth. Eleanor had been the home's warmth, its music, its color. Now all that was left was the hollow echo of her absence and Lily's profound, unnerving silence. Lily, at 7, was a porcelain doll of a child with her father's stormy eyes and her mother's cascade of blonde hair. Diagnosed with severe non-verbal autism spectrum disorder, at age 3 she lived in a world of her own, a world no one could enter. Alexander had thrown millions at the problem. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a renowned child psychologist with a string of publications and a notoriously long waiting list, visited 3 times a week. There were speech therapists, occupational therapists, even equine therapists. The result was always the same: nothing. Lily didn't speak, she didn't make eye contact, and her only reactions to the world were retreat or, on bad days, a silent, writhing meltdown that left Alexander feeling helpless and utterly alone. His life was a brutally precise schedule. 5 a.m. Gym. 7 a.m. Market analysis. 8 a.m. Breakfast, where he'd sit opposite Lily's empty chair because she ate in her designated sensory room with a nurse. Then a full day of corporate warfare, returning home long after Lily was asleep. He loved her with a desperate, aching intensity, but it was the love of an engineer for a beautiful, broken machine he couldn't fix. He saw her diagnosis, not her. The household staff turned over with alarming frequency. They were intimidated by the mansion's sterile perfection and frustrated by their inability to connect with the child at its center. The latest departure was a nanny who, after a week, had declared the house too sad. That's why he'd barely registered the hiring of the new maid, Isabella Rossi. His fastidious housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, had handled it. The report on his desk had been brief, 28 years old, excellent references from a less glamorous New York City hotel, quiet, diligent. He'd glanced at it and moved on. She was a cog in the machine. Her job was to erase footprints, polish surfaces, and remain invisible. For the first few weeks, Isabella did just that. She was a ghost in a simple grey uniform, her dark curly hair tied back severely, her movements efficient and silent. Alexander would occasionally catch a glimpse of her, a fleeting shadow wiping down a banister or arranging flowers with a gentle, focused touch. She never made eye contact with him, and for that he was grateful. He had enough complicated human interactions in his day. The change began subtly. It started with the music. The clinical silence of the house was occasionally punctuated by a soft, melodic humming. It wasn't the pop music the younger staff sometimes played on their headphones. It was something else, something old and folkloric. He'd once paused outside the kitchen and heard a lilting tune, a lullaby that sounded vaguely Portuguese. He dismissed it. Then he noticed small things in Lily's wing of the house. A row of her sensory blocks, usually scattered randomly, were arranged in a perfect repeating color pattern. A small, smooth stone was left on her windowsill, catching the afternoon light. He assumed it was the work of one of the therapists trying a new technique. Dr. Reed assured him it wasn't. "We are focusing on tablet-assisted communication, Alexander," she'd said in her crisp clinical tone during their weekly review. "We must not introduce unsanctioned variables. Consistency is key." She showed him the data on her tablet. Lily had touched the thirsty icon twice that week. Dr. Reed called this potential progress. To Alexander, it felt like a mountain of failure. 2 digital taps in a sea of silence. The breaking point, the moment the world fractured and rearranged itself, came on a Tuesday afternoon. A board meeting had been unexpectedly cancelled, and Alexander found himself home hours earlier than usual. The house was quiet as always. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid doing little to soothe the knot of anxiety in his chest. He walked towards his study, but as he passed the long hallway leading to Lily's playroom, he heard it. It wasn't the humming this time. It was a voice. Isabella's voice, soft and musical. That wasn't unusual. The staff was allowed to be in that wing. But then he heard another sound. A whisper. A single, fragile, melodic syllable that was not Isabella's. His blood ran cold. He froze, standing perfectly still in the marble hallway, straining to listen. He had never not once heard a vocalization from Lily that wasn't a cry or a sound of distress. He crept closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. The playroom door was slightly ajar. He peered through the crack, his world narrowing to that sliver of vision. The scene inside was something out of a dream. The floor was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. Isabella was sitting on the floor, not in her grey uniform, but in simple slacks and a sweater. Before her, sitting cross-legged and closer to another human being than Alexander had seen her in years, was Lily. In Isabella's hands were not flashcards from Dr. Reed's expensive kit, but simple, brightly coloured pieces of fabric. "I vårt pasmotri, Lily," Isabella said softly, her voice a gentle river. She held up a piece of vibrant red silk. "Krasny, like a summer berry." And then it happened. Lily, whose gaze was usually a million miles away, looked at the fabric. Her tiny hand reached out not to grab, but to gently touch it. And from her lips, the sound came again, clearer this time. "Kras. Ni." The word was Russian. Alexander felt the glass in his hand tremble. His mind, a fortress of logic and order, was being stormed. Russian. Where in God's name would his daughter, a non-verbal child in Greenwich, Connecticut, learn a Russian word? Isabella smiled, a radiant, beautiful thing that transformed her usually somber face. She didn't praise Lily with the loud, performative enthusiasm of the therapists. She simply nodded, as if this were the most natural conversation in the world. She then picked up a blue piece of fabric. "Y ahora este," she murmured, her accent shifting flawlessly. "Azul, como el cielo antes de las estrellas." And now this one. Blue, like the sky before the stars. Lily watched her, her focus absolute. A moment passed, then a tiny, breathy whisper. "Azul." Spanish. Alexander's mind was reeling. He felt a dizzying wave of confusion, suspicion, and a terrifying, unfamiliar flicker of hope. He pushed the door open, the heavy oak swinging inward with a soft groan. The spell was broken. Isabella's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Lily flinched, her body curling inward, the light in her eyes extinguishing as she retreated back into her shell. She scrambled away from Isabella, pressing herself into a corner, her silence more profound than ever. Alexander stood in the doorway, a titan of industry, rendered speechless. He looked from his daughter, now a picture of her usual distress, to the maid who was scrambling to her feet, her face pale. "What?" he began, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "is going on in here?" The air in the playroom crackled with tension. Isabella stood frozen, her hands clutching the colorful scraps of fabric as if they were evidence in a crime. Fear was etched onto her face, the fear of someone who knew they had trespassed, who had been caught in a place they didn't belong. "Mr. Sterling," she stammered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. I was just cleaning." Alexander's eyes, cold and analytical, swept the room. It was immaculate, but that wasn't what he saw. He saw his daughter, his silent, unreachable daughter cowering in a corner. And he saw this woman, this maid who had somehow elicited a response from Lily that a legion of experts could not. "Cleaning," he repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. He took a step into the room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. What I heard didn't sound like cleaning. I heard languages. I heard my daughter. He took another step, his shadow falling over her. "Start talking. Now. Who are you? And what were you doing with my child?" Isabella swallowed hard, her gaze darting towards Lily, who was now rocking silently, her hands over her ears. "My name is Isabella Rossi. I talk to her sometimes while I work. That's all." "You talk to her in Russian, in Spanish." Alexander's voice rose, a rare breach of his iron control. "Don't lie to me. I'm not a fool. I heard her respond." The accusation hung in the air. Isabella's shoulders slumped in defeat. She knew there was no point in denying it. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She listens. She understands." "Understands what?" he demanded. "What is this? Some kind of game, a trick?" The suspicion was a bitter acid in his throat. In his world, people with hidden talents were people with hidden agendas. Was this a setup? A bizarre, elaborate ploy for money? No, never. Isabella insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "It's not a trick. Lily is... she's brilliant. Her mind is like a sponge, but the faucet is stuck. The words are all in there, Mr. Sterling. All the words from everyone who ever talks around her. The therapists, the television, the audiobooks. She absorbs it all. But she can't get them out in the same way." Alexander stared at her, trying to process the absurdity of the claim. Brilliant. My daughter has a severe developmental disorder. She's non-verbal. Non-verbal doesn't mean non-thinking. Isabella countered her passion, overriding her fear. I noticed it the first week, the way she would arrange her blocks. It wasn't random. She was recreating the patterns on the book spines on the shelf. Then one day a documentary was playing on the television in the den, something about the Amazon. It was in Portuguese with subtitles. Later I was humming a lullaby my grandmother taught me, a Portuguese fado, and Lily. She turned her head. She looked at me. It was the first time. She took a hesitant breath, her story tumbling out. So I experimented. I started speaking to her softly in different languages while I tidied her room. I'd use simple words, colors, objects. French, Italian, German. It was like tuning a radio. For English there was too much noise, too much pressure from everyone trying to make her speak. But these other languages, they were just for us. There was no expectation. It was just sound music, and she started to respond. Alexander's head was spinning. He looked at Lily, who was still rocking, lost to them again. Was it possible? Could this unassuming maid have stumbled upon a secret key to his daughter's mind? Or was she dangerously delusional, projecting her own fantasies onto a vulnerable child? He needed data. He needed an expert. Stay here, he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned and strode out of the room, pulling out his phone. He dialed Dr. Evelyn Reed. Evelyn, he said, his voice clipped. I need you at the house, now. It's an emergency. 40 minutes later, Dr. Reed swept into the mansion, her briefcase in hand, and an air of clinical authority preceding her. Alexander explained the situation in his study, the words feeling foreign and insane on his tongue. The maid. She claims she's been teaching Lily multiple languages. She claims Lily is responding. Dr. Reed's expression was one of profound patronizing skepticism. Alexander, with all due respect, that is highly improbable. The subject, a maid, is likely experiencing a form of projection, what we call caregiver wish fulfillment. She wants to see progress so badly that she interprets any random vocalization, any echolalia, as a meaningful response. I heard her, Alexander insisted. It was a word, krasny, a Russian word for red, Dr. Reed said with a dismissive wave of her hand. The color red is a primary focus in our sensory therapy sessions. Lily has likely heard the word from an educational program. Isabella the maid hears this echo, and perhaps knowing the word herself builds a fantasy around it. It's just but not uncommon. He felt a surge of frustration. I want you to test it. Dr. Reed sighed, the sound of a patient adult dealing with a difficult child. Very well, if it will put your mind at ease. They returned to the playroom. Isabella was now sitting quietly on a small chair, her hands folded in her lap, looking like a prisoner awaiting sentencing. Lily was still in her corner. The atmosphere was thick with dread. Isabella, Dr. Reed began, her voice falsely gentle. Mr. Sterling tells me you believe you've been having conversations with Lily. Could you demonstrate for us? Isabella looked at Alexander, her eyes pleading. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. She took a deep breath and walked slowly towards Lily's corner. She knelt a few feet away, not trying to crowd her. She began to sing softly, a gentle French lullaby. Fais dodo colas, mon petit frère. Lily's rocking slowed, her head tilted just a fraction. Isabella held out a yellow piece of fabric. Jaune, she whispered. Le soleil est jaune. Yellow. The sun is yellow. Lily did nothing. The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Reed's lips thinned into a triumphant, knowing smile. As I suspected, echolalia can be triggered by specific contexts. With us present, the context is broken. Try another, Alexander commanded, his voice tight. Isabella's face was flush with humiliation. She tried again, this time in German, holding up a green scrap. Grün wie das Gras. Green like the grass. Silence. Lily had her face buried in her knees. Dr. Reed closed her notebook with a soft snap. I think that's conclusive. Alexander, I must strongly advise against this. This woman, while perhaps well-intentioned, is creating a confusing and potentially damaging environment for Lily. She is not a trained professional. Her methods are unsanctioned and disruptive to our established evidence-based therapy. I recommend her employment be terminated immediately to avoid further regression. Each word was a hammer blow to the fragile hope that had flickered inside Alexander. The doctor was right. It was logical. It was scientific. This was a fantasy, a cruel trick of the light. Thank you, doctor, he said, his voice flat and empty. I will handle it. After escorting Dr. Reed to the door, Alexander returned to the playroom. Isabella hadn't moved. She looked up at him, her face a mask of misery. Mr. Sterling, please, she begged. She's just scared. You were there, the doctor. It was too much, but it's real. I swear it's real. He looked from her desperate face to his daughter's withdrawn form. His logical mind sided entirely with Dr. Reed. It was wishful thinking. A sad, lonely woman and a silent child creating a world of make-believe. And yet, the clarity of that one word, Krasny, haunted him. He was a man who trusted data above all else. Dr. Reed had provided her expert analysis. But what if her analysis was based on an incomplete data set? You will not speak to my daughter again, he said, his one glacial. You will not go near her rooms. You will perform your cleaning duties and nothing more. If I hear of any deviation from this, you will be gone. Am I clear? Yes, Mr. Sterling, she whispered, her spirit crushed. But as he walked away, a new plan formed in his mind, a plan born of his own world. He would not fire her. Not yet. He would do what he did when he suspected a flaw in a critical system. He would put it under surveillance. That night, Alexander made a call to his head of security at Sterling Innovations, a man named David Chen, who specialized in corporate espionage and counterintelligence. David, he said, his voice low, I need a surveillance package installed in my home. The playroom, the sensory room, the hallway, high-definition video, and most importantly, audio. I want it to be completely undetectable. And I want the feed streamed directly and only to my personal server. No one else is to know. Consider it a matter of national security. He would get his own data. He would run his own test. And he would discover once and for all if Isabella Rossi was a charlatan or a miracle worker. The house was no longer just a home. It was a laboratory, and the experiment was about to begin. The next 2 weeks were a strange, silent war. On the surface, the Sterling estate returned to its rigid, sterile normal. Isabella Rossi became a ghost again, a blur of motion at the edge of Alexander's vision. She diligently cleaned the designated areas, her face an impassive mask, her vibrant energy extinguished. She kept her distance from Lily's wing, just as he had commanded. The house fell back into its deep, suffocating silence, broken only by the scheduled intrusions of Dr. Reed and her team. But beneath the surface, Alexander was living a secret life. Every night after the mansion fell dark, he would retreat to his study, lock the door, and open a secure encrypted portal on his laptop. The feed from the hidden cameras would flicker to life, turning him into a voyeur in his own home. For the first few days, the footage was a painful affirmation of Dr. Reed's diagnosis. He watched hours of therapy sessions. He saw Dr. Reed, patiently but fruitlessly, trying to engage Lily with the communication tablet. He saw Lily's frustration, her retreat into herself. He saw the occupational therapist trying to get her to hold a crayon, only for Lily to let it drop her attention, fixed on a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam. It was a catalogue of his failures, a high-definition broadcast of his despair. He saw Isabella, too. He watched her on the hallway cameras, a silent figure polishing floors or dusting paintings. Her eyes often straying with a look of profound longing towards the closed door of Lily's playroom. She never crossed the threshold he had forbidden her. She was obeying his orders perfectly. He started to feel foolish. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm spying on his maid. Dr. Reed was right. He had let a moment of bizarre hope cloud his judgment. He was about to shut it all down when on the fifth night, something changed. Isabella was cleaning the grand library, a 2-story cathedral of books that adjoined the playroom. It was late past 10 o'clock. She was alone. As she dusted a shelf of leather-bound classics, she began to hum. It was a sad, beautiful Japanese folk song, a melody her grandmother, a diplomat's wife, had taught her. In his study, Alexander leaned closer to the screen. He switched the audio focus to the playroom microphone. Over the faint hum of the room's air purifier, he could hear it. A tiny rhythmic tapping. He switched to the playroom camera. Lily was supposed to be asleep. But she wasn't. She was sitting up in her bed, her small finger tapping against the headboard in perfect rhythm with Isabella's distant humming. A coincidence? Possibly. The next day, Alexander watched as Isabella cleaned the sunroom, which shared a wall with the sensory room where Lily was spending her afternoon. This time, Isabella didn't hum. She spoke so softly it was almost inaudible, as if speaking to herself. Il pleut, bergère, she murmured, reciting a French nursery rhyme. Rentre tes blancs moutons. Alexander's fingers flew across his keyboard, toggling to the sensory room feed. Lily was in her ball pit, surrounded by a sea of soft plastic spheres. She was still, but her hand was moving. She was picking up only the white balls and moving them to one citomus, separating them from the others. She was bringing in her white sheep. Alexander felt a jolt, a current of electricity that shot through his skepticism. This was not a coincidence. This was communication. A silent, secret language passing through the very walls of his house. He became obsessed. He spent every spare moment watching the feeds. He saw Isabella working in the kitchen, quietly listing the names of vegetables in Italian. Pomodoro, cetriolo, carota. An hour later, he watched Lily's lunch. She would not touch her food until the nurse at her wit's end happened to push the plate so that the tomato, cucumber, and carrot were aligned in a row. Then and only then would she eat. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't echolalia. This was a complex, nuanced system of interaction that Isabella had built on a foundation of pure observation and respect. She had never tried to force Lily to speak. She had simply provided a rich linguistic environment and allowed Lily to respond in the ways she was able. Tapping, sorting, arranging. Lily's world wasn't empty. It was a symphony of patterns and associations, and Isabella was the only one who had bothered to learn the music. The rage Alexander felt was cold and sharp. It wasn't directed at Isabella, but at Dr. Reed, at the entire system he had trusted. They had come with their clipboards and their data points, their theories and their tablets, and they had never once truly seen his daughter. They saw a diagnosis to be managed, a problem to be solved. Isabella had seen a person to be known. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that shattered his perception of the Maid and reshaped his entire world, came not from the surveillance, but from a background check. His initial suspicion had never fully faded, and his corporate mind demanded to know every variable. He had asked David Chen to dig deeper into Isabella Rossi's past, to go beyond the hotel references. The report arrived in his secure inbox late one evening. He opened it expecting to find, he didn't know what. A history of petty scams. A troubled family. What he found left him breathless. Isabella Rossi was not just a hotel maid. 5 years ago, she had been Isabella Moretti, the star pupil of the linguistics faculty at the University of Cambridge. Her specialization was psycholinguistics, specifically the study of atypical language acquisition in neurodivergent children. Her professor's notes, which David Chen had somehow procured, called her a once-in-a-generation talent, a ferocious intellect with a stunningly empathetic research model. She had been fluent in 7 languages by the age of 20 and was in the process of learning 3 more. Her doctoral thesis was titled The Symphony of Silence, Unlocking Latent Language Through Non-Verbal Multilinguistic Immersion. It was her life's work. Then tragedy struck. Her father, a small business owner in Italy, suffered a massive stroke. Her mother, overwhelmed, could not cope with the spiraling medical debts. The family business collapsed. Faced with an impossible choice, Isabella had abandoned her PhD, her name, her entire future, just months from completion. She had moved to the US under her mother's maiden name, Rossi, taking menial jobs and sending every spare dollar home to pay for her father's care. Alexander stared at the screen, the words blurring. He looked at the grainy photo from her university ID, a younger, brighter-eyed Isabella full of promise, and he thought of the quiet, subdued woman in the grey uniform. The greatest mind in the field he had so desperately sought help from wasn't a high-priced consultant in a Manhattan office. She was polishing his silverware for a fraction of what he paid Dr. Reed in an hour. He felt a profound, gut-wrenching shame. He had treated this brilliant, self-sacrificing woman with suspicion and contempt. He had threatened her, silenced her, and confined her to the shadows. He closed the laptop. The data was in. The experiment was over, and the results were going to change everything. He stood up and walked out of his study. He found Isabella in the main hall, finishing her last task of the night, wiping down the grand piano, the piano Eleanor used to play. "Isabella," he said. His voice was different. The glacial authority was gone, replaced by something softer, something uncertain. She turned, startled, expecting another reprimand. "Mr. Sterling." He walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. "I owe you an apology," he said the words, feeling clumsy in his mouth. "A profound one." Isabella stared at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and apprehension. "I have been blind," he continued, struggling to find the right words. "I've been watching. I installed cameras." Her face paled, a flicker of fear and violation in her eyes. "You spied on me." "I spied on everyone," he corrected gently. "On the therapists, on Lily, on you. I needed to understand. And now I do." He took a breath. "What you have done with my daughter, it's not a trick. It's a miracle. You didn't just teach her words. You gave her a voice when no one else could even hear her." He paused, his gaze intense. I also know who you are. Isabella Moretti, Cambridge. Your thesis. The color drained completely from her face. She looked as if he had stripped her bare. I'm a man who deals in information, he said simply. You sacrificed everything for your family. You hid your genius from the world, and you brought it into my home to my daughter. And I punished you for it. He looked at her, not as an employer to a maid, but as one human being to another. Dr. Reed is fired. Her entire team. As of this moment, their access to this house is revoked. The unsanctioned variable is now the only variable I care about. He took another step closer. I am asking you, Miss Moretti. Will you help me? Will you teach me how to talk to my daughter? Isabella looked at him, her eyes welling with tears, not of fear or sadness, but of a staggering, overwhelming relief. It was the relief of being seen. After years of hiding in the shadows, someone finally saw the light she carried. Yes, she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Yes, Mr. Sterling. I will. The firing of Dr. Evelyn Reed and her entire entourage sent a shockwave through the sterile ecosystem of the Sterling estate. It was a declaration of a new world order. Alexander cancelled all of Lily's existing therapies, a move that his personal assistant in a hushed and worried tone called drastic. But to Alexander, it was the first truly logical step he had taken in years. Isabella, or Miss Moretti, as Alexander now insisted on calling her, much to her initial discomfort, was transformed. She shed the grey uniform like a second skin, and with it, the mantle of invisibility. At Alexander's insistence, she now wore her own clothes, simple but elegant, that spoke to the intelligent, warm woman she was. She was no longer a maid. Her official and highly lucrative new title was Head of Developmental Communication, a title they had invented together. The house began to change. The clinical silence was replaced with a tapestry of sound. Isabella would play music from around the world, classical Indian ragas, Celtic folk tunes, Brazilian bossa nova. She spoke to Lily constantly, seamlessly weaving between languages. She taught Alexander the fundamentals of her method, patience, observation, and respect. Don't ask her questions you want the answers to, she explained one afternoon as they watched Lily arrange fallen leaves in the garden. Instead, describe the world to her. Give her the words, the sounds, the textures, and let her build her own connections. Her language is not linear. It's associative. Alexander was a clumsy student at first. His mind, so accustomed to direct commands and immediate results, struggled with the subtlety of it all. But he was determined. He started learning basic phrases in French, Japanese, and Italian. He would sit with Lily, not trying to force eye contact, but simply narrating the world. The leaf is green, verde, midori. And for the first time, he saw flickers of the girl behind the diagnosis. A slight turn of her head, a finger tapping a rhythm he recognized from a song Isabella had played. One evening, as he read a story to her in clumsy, halting French, she reached out and placed her small hand on his. It was not a grab or a pull, but a simple, gentle touch of connection. Alexander had to stop reading, overwhelmed by an emotion so powerful it stole his breath. The fortress around his heart was beginning to crumble. But as light began to flood the Sterling estate, a shadow was creeping in from the outside. That shadow had a name: Marcus Thorne. Marcus was Eleanor's younger brother, a man who possessed all of the Sterling family's ambition, but none of its brilliance or integrity. A partner at a boutique investment firm, Marcus moved through life with a predatory grace, his charming smile concealing a core of deep-seated resentment. He had always been jealous of Alexander's staggering success and felt that as Eleanor's brother, he was entitled to a larger piece of the pie. He saw Lily not as his niece, but as a tragic, incompetent heir, and Alexander as a man weakened by grief. He had been watching from a distance, gathering information, waiting for an opportunity. The sudden, unexplained firing of Dr. Reed, a respected name in her field, was the opening he had been waiting for. He arrived at the estate unannounced one sunny Saturday, dressed in expensive casual wear, a carefully curated gift basket in hand. He found Alexander and Isabella in the garden with Lily, who was tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. "Alex." "There you are." Marcus boomed, his smile forehand disarming. "I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd drop by." "And this must be the famous Lily bug." Alexander stiffened. He had never liked Marcus, and Eleanor had only tolerated him out of familial duty. "Marcus, this is a surprise." Marcus's eyes flicked to Isabella, his gaze lingering for a moment too long, sizing her up. "And you are?" "This is Isabella Moretti," Alexander said, his tone firm. "She is Lily's primary developmental specialist." Marcus raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Moretti, I thought your guru was Dr. Reed. Heard you let her go. Bold move. Any particular reason?" The question was casual, but the intent was sharp. "We decided to pursue a new, more effective methodology," Alexander said curtly, not wanting to give Marcus any ammunition. "I see." Marcus said, his gaze returning to Lily, who had retreated into herself at the sound of his loud voice. He adopted a look of deep, sorrowful concern. "It's just... well, people talk, Alex. Firing a doctor of Reed's stature, cutting off all established therapy. It looks erratic. The board at Sterling Innovations, they value stability above all else. You know that." It was a veiled threat, a reminder that Alexander's personal life and corporate standing were inextricably linked. Marcus was testing the waters, probing for weakness. "My daughter's well-being is my only concern," Alexander said, his voice cold. "Her progress in the last few weeks has been greater than in the last 2 years combined." "Progress?" Marcus asked, his eyes on Lily, who was now completely still. "That's wonderful to hear. I'd love to see it." A tense silence fell. Isabella, who had remained quiet, saw the challenge in Marcus's eyes. She knelt beside Lily and whispered something in Arabic, a language she had recently introduced, pointing to a small white flower. "Zara Bida." Lily, after a long moment, picked up a white stone and placed it beside the flower. Marcus scoffed a quiet, dismissive sound. "Charming parlor tricks. Alex, you're a genius, but you're also a grieving father. You're vulnerable. Are you sure you know who you're letting into your life, into your daughter's life?" He looked pointedly at Isabella. "A specialist with no public record, no credentials I can find. It's a risk." The visit was short, but the poison had been administered. Over the next few weeks, the consequences began to ripple outward. A prominent financial blog published a blind item piece about a reclusive East Coast tech billionaire whose erratic behavior and questionable household staffing choices were causing concern among shareholders. Alexander knew it was Marcus's work. His calls with board members became strained, filled with polite but pointed inquiries about his home situation. But Marcus's true target was not the company. It was Lily. Control of Lily meant influence over her inheritance, a vast fortune, and a significant block of Sterling Innovations stock held in her trust. His next move was far more insidious. He contacted the recently fired and deeply resentful Dr. Evelyn Reed. They met in a discreet restaurant in Manhattan. Marcus laid out his proposition over expensive wine. "Dr. Reed, you were wronged," he began, his voice oozing sympathy. "You are a respected professional, and you were dismissed in favor of a maid. It's an insult to your entire profession." Dr. Reed, still smarting from the humiliation, needed little encouragement. "The man is unstable. He's being manipulated by a charlatan. The child Lily is at risk." "Precisely," Marcus purred. "And as her uncle, I have a duty to be concerned. I'm thinking of her welfare. It might be necessary for a more stable family member to step in to ensure her therapeutic regimen is sound and her future is protected. I might need to petition for conservatorship." Dr. Reed's eyes lit up with understanding. A conservatorship case would require expert testimony. She would be the star witness. It would be her ultimate vindication. "The maid Isabella is practicing medicine without a license." Dr. Reed said the words tasting like sweet revenge. "She has isolated the child from proven therapeutic models. She has undue influence over Alexander, who is clearly not in a rational state of mind. It's a classic case of manipulation, preying on grief." "Excellent," Marcus said, refilling her glass. "I'll need a full report from you. A psychological evaluation in absentia of Alexander's state of mind, and a professional opinion on the danger Lily is in. Formal on your letterhead." "It will be my pleasure," Dr. Reed confirmed. The serpent had found its venom. Marcus now had a medical expert to legitimize his power grab. He began laying the legal groundwork, preparing to strike. He would paint Alexander as an on-table man, under the spell of a mysterious woman, a father endangering his own disabled child. He would argue that he, the concerned and stable uncle, was the only one who could save Lily. The stage was being set for a battle that would be fought not in a boardroom, but in a courtroom, with Lily's entire future hanging in the balance. The legal documents arrived on a crisp autumn morning. They were delivered by a stern-faced courier and felt as cold and heavy as a tombstone. Alexander read the petition in his study, the legal jargon a thin veil for the brutal attack it represented. Marcus Thorne, acting out of grave concern for the welfare of his niece, Lily Sterling, was petitioning the court for temporary conservatorship over Lily and her estate. Attached was a scathing 20-page report from Dr. Evelyn Reed diagnosing Alexander from afar with prolonged and complicated grief disorder, manifesting as paranoid judgment and susceptibility to undue influence. She described Isabella's methods as reckless, unproven, and potentially abusive, and concluded that Lily was in imminent danger of developmental and psychological harm. The words blurred before Alexander's eyes. It was a perfectly executed corporate raid, but the target was his life, his daughter. Marcus had weaponized his grief, twisted his love for Lily into a sign of incompetence. He felt a suffocating rage, followed by a chilling fear. Marcus wasn't stupid. He wouldn't have filed this without believing he could win. The preliminary hearing was set for a week's time. A week to prepare for a fight that felt impossible. How could he prove a miracle to a judge? How could he demonstrate the symphony of silent communication he now understood so well in the cold adversarial environment of a courtroom? He called his lawyer, a shark named Julian Croft, who listened grimly. "This is bad, Alex," Julian said. "Marcus has an expert witness. We have a story. Judges like credentials. They like data they can understand. She sorts blocks when she hears Italian is going to sound like witchcraft." The week was a living nightmare. The atmosphere in the house grew heavy with unspoken anxiety. Isabella named in the petition as the unqualified and manipulative influence felt the weight of the accusation acutely. She saw the worry etched on Alexander's face and feared she was the cause of his ruin. "Maybe I should leave," she said one evening, her voice trembling. "If I'm gone, Marcus has no case." "No," Alexander stated, his voice iron. "If you leave, he wins. He proves his point. We see this through. Together." The day of the hearing arrived grey and foreboding. Alexander felt as though he were walking to his own execution. He, Isabella, and Julian sat on one side of the polished courtroom table. Across from them, Marcus sat with his legal team, looking composed and concerned. Dr. Reed was seated behind them, a picture of professional authority. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Annabel Price, read the petition with a neutral expression. She listened as Marcus's lawyer laid out their case, painting a picture of a grieving, irrational father and a vulnerable child being manipulated by an enigmatic stranger with a fabricated past. They presented Isabella's history as a maid, conveniently omitting her academic background. Then Dr. Reed took the stand. She was a masterful witness, speaking in calm, clinical terms about Alexander's erratic behavior and the dangers of Isabella's unsanctioned methods. She spoke of the importance of consistency and evidence-based practice, making Isabella's work sound like dangerous folk magic. "In my professional opinion, Your Honor," Dr. Reed concluded, "Lily Sterling's development has not only stalled, it has regressed. She is being isolated and subjected to an environment of confusion. Immediate intervention is required." Julian did his best on cross-examination, bringing up Isabella's Cambridge background, but Marcus's lawyer skillfully objected, dismissing it as irrelevant, since she never completed her degree. "She is for all intents and purposes a college dropout, not a doctor," he argued successfully. The judge looked troubled. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her gaze fixing on him, "this is a serious allegation. Your brother-in-law and a respected expert have raised significant concerns. What evidence can you provide to counter this? How can you demonstrate this progress you claim?" This was the moment. Alexander's heart pounded. He knew words were not enough. "Your Honor," he began, "the progress isn't something that can be shown on a chart. It is a real interactive communication." "Then show me," the judge said simply. Alexander looked at Julian, who gave a slight, helpless shrug. He had no choice. He turned to Isabella. "We need Lily." It was a colossal risk. Bringing a child with severe sensory issues into the tense, unfamiliar environment of a courtroom was a recipe for disaster. But it was the only move they had left. A recess was called. Isabella left and returned half an hour later, holding a quiet and overwhelmed Lily by the hand. Lily's eyes were wide, taking in the strange room, the dark wood, the stern faces. She was clutching a small, worn wooden bird, a gift from Isabella. Marcus watched them, a faint, predatory smile on his lips. He knew this would be a catastrophe. Lily would have a meltdown, proving his point perfectly. "Mr. Sterling, the court is waiting," Judge Price said, her patience wearing thin. Alexander's mind raced. How could he do this? He looked at Isabella, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. He took a deep breath. "Lily," he began softly, trying to block out the rest of the room. He held up a red legal folder. He tried to remember Isabella's lessons. Soft voice, no pressure. He stumbled through the word in Russian. "Krasny." Lily just stared, her knuckles white as she gripped the wooden bird. Nothing. Dr. Reed smirked. Marcus leaned back in his chair, victorious. Isabella knelt. She gently touched the wooden bird Lily was holding. "Pájaro," she whispered in Spanish. Then she pointed to the dark wood of the judge's bench. Madera. Bird. Wood. Lily's eyes followed her finger, but she remained silent, a statue of anxiety. Marcus's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, I think we have seen enough. The child is clearly distressed and non-responsive. This is bordering on cruelty. We ask that you put a stop to this and grant my client's petition." The judge looked pained. "I'm inclined to agree. I'm not seeing. Please." Alexander interrupted, his voice cracking with desperation. It was then that the argument erupted. "This is a farce, Alex," Marcus exclaimed, standing up and pointing a finger. "You're hurting her. Can't you see that you're so lost in your grief you've allowed this maid to fill your head with fantasies while your daughter gets worse? You know nothing about my daughter." Alexander shot back, his control finally snapping. "This is about money, you greedy parasite. Enough!" Judge Price's voice boomed, silencing the room. The shouting, the anger, the tension. It was too much. Lily, who had been a silent statue, began to tremble. A low sound of distress escaped her lips. Her face crumpled. A meltdown was imminent. Dr. Reed nodded knowingly. This was it. The final damning proof. Isabella rushed to her side, trying to shield her. Alexander felt a wave of cold dread wash over him. He had failed. He had brought her here only to break her. And then, in the suffocating silence that followed the judge's outburst, a voice emerged. It was small but clear and resonant. It cut through the tension like a crystal bell. "Pajarito en la madera. Cállate, papa." The room went utterly still. Everyone froze. The words were Spanish. "Little bird on the wood. Be quiet, Daddy." Alexander stared, his heart stopping. Lily took a shaky breath, her wide, terrified eyes looking directly at her father. And then she spoke again, her voice gaining strength, the words stitching themselves together from the fabric of her hidden world. "Be quiet," she said this time in perfect unaccented English. She turned her head towards her stunned uncle. Her gaze was direct, unwavering. She spoke a single, chillingly clear word in French, a word she had heard Isabella use once when describing a rotten piece of fruit. "Pourri." Rotten. Finally, she turned her gaze to Judge Price. She held up the small wooden bird. Her voice was soft, but it filled the cavernous room. It was the voice of his wife, Eleanor, a phrase she would use whenever she was about to make a profound point. "Listen," Lily said. "Just listen." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Dr. Reed's jaw was slack. Her clinical certainty shattered. Marcus Thorne was ashen-faced, as if he'd seen a ghost. Alexander sank into his chair, the strength gone from his legs. He wasn't looking at the judge or his enemies. He was looking at his daughter, his brilliant, miraculous daughter. And for the first time, he wasn't just looking. He was listening. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of a voice he thought he would never hear. And in that moment, Alexander Sterling knew that nothing ever again would be the same. The world didn't just change for Alexander Sterling. It was reborn. Lily's voice, unleashed in that courtroom, became the catalyst for a revolution of love and understanding. The case was immediately dismissed. Marcus Thorne and Dr. Reed were disgraced, their ambitions crumbling into dust before the undeniable truth of a child's unlocked mind. But the story doesn't end there. Alexander, humbled and transformed, channeled his immense resources not into building technology, but into building bridges for minds like Lily's. Together, he and Isabella founded the Moretti-Sterling Institute, a global foundation dedicated to the empathetic multilinguistic approach that gave Lily her voice. They proved that neurodiversity isn't a bug in the system to be fixed, but a different operating system, deserving of respect and its own unique language. Lily, once a prisoner of silence, now thrives, a polyglot prodigy who communicates across cultures, reminding the world that the most profound intellects often reside where we least expect them. If this story of hope discovery and a father's transformative love touched your heart, please help us share it with the world. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and remind us of the incredible power of human connection. What hidden genius do you believe lies just beneath the surface, waiting for the right person to listen? Let us know in the comments below.